change.
Too much poverty in our life. People are living from hand to mouth, and there is insecurity. People are dying like chicken in our schools, our hospitals.
Anytime. If the story matters wherever you are. If the news is part of your life, keep it with you.
Thank you very much. My name is Agnes. I am one of the nurses in NHS. I have worked in NHS in respiratory ward and stroke unit and general medicine. Caring is most important in my profession. I care about the future of NHS and I care about the people I look after. I am proud to introduce you today the next Prime Minister, the leader of the Labour Party, Ed Miliband.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it. Why don't you go and have a seat? Thank you. Well, Agnes, thank you so much for being with us. Let's hear it for Agnes and for all of the staff of our National Health Service. Thank you also to Harriet Harman, and thank you to all of you for being here today. We're here today to launch our campaign in the tightest general election for a generation. We know it's going to be a really tough battle. And what an amazing place to start our campaign. The site of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. The place where all of the United Kingdom, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland came together and showed the world what we can do. Now that incredible summer was our country at its best. And what was at the heart of those games? A spirit of optimism, a belief that Britain can do better. And that same spirit is at the heart of our election campaign. It is that spirit that is going to drive us on in the next few weeks, because we know Britain can do better than this. The worst record on living standards since the 1920s. The Tories say this is as good as it gets. We say Britain can do better than this. 5 million people paid less than the living wage. The Tories say that's as good as it gets. We say Britain can do better than this. Tax breaks for the richest, tax rises for everyone else. The Tories say it's as good as it gets, and we say Britain can do better than this. And the health service going backwards, and the threat of deeper cuts still to come. The Tories say this is as good as it gets. We say Britain can, Britain must do better than this. And you know, they're the pessimists in this campaign. We're the optimists, because we know Britain can do better than this. And what did we see last night? We saw a rattled Prime Minister running from his record. And we heard a Prime Minister living in a different world. A Prime Minister asked about the soaring use of food banks. He says it's not because of the bedroom tax, not because of falling living standards, not because of payday lenders. It's because of a more effective advertising campaign by the Conservative government. He's asked about the explosion of zero-hours contracts. He says it's not because of the growth of low-paid, insecure work on his watch. It's really because people want zero-hours contracts. But then he says, oh no, he says, I couldn't live on a 0 hours contract. I say to the Prime Minister, if it's not good enough for you, it's not good enough for the people of Britain. And you know, this election is not simply a choice between two different parties and different leaders, but it's between two different visions of the country. The Tory vision that says Britain only succeeds when a few at the top do well, with tax cuts for the very wealthiest and insecurity for everyone else. Or a Labour vision based on the idea that Britain only succeeds when working people succeed. That's why this election matters so much. And this vision runs through each of our 5 election pledges. Our first pledge is to build a strong economic foundation. We'll cut the deficit every year and balance the books as soon as possible in the next Parliament. That will mean common sense spending reductions, with departmental budgets falling outside protected areas. But we will always protect key departments like education and health. And we will never, ever adopt extreme Tory spending plans that would lead to the disintegration of our public services. And as part of that plan to reduce the deficit, and unlike this government, we'll have fair tax changes, reversing David Cameron's millionaires' tax cut, and clamping down on tax avoidance and evasion. Because we take a simple view. In a fair society, there shouldn't be one rule for the rich and powerful and another rule for everyone else. There should be one rule for all, and that is what we will make sure happens under a Labour government. Our second pledge is for higher living standards for working families. Because Britain can't succeed when working people are struggling week in, week out, month after month, year after year. Something the Tories just don't get. That's why we'll deliver an £8 minimum wage, 25 hours free childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds, an energy price freeze so prices can only fall and cannot rise, and a ban on those exploitative 0 hours contracts. By law, under a Labour government, if you work regular hours, you will get a regular contract. Our third pledge is focused on the bedrock of security for working families, our National Health Service. Friends, we need to rescue our NHS from this government, and we will. Just think about how far backwards the NHS has gone in the last 5 years. People waiting longer and longer to see a GP. Ambulances queuing up outside hospitals because A&Es are full. Even a treatment tent erected in a hospital car park. For all of the promises, for all of the airbrushed posters, David Cameron has broken his solemn vow to the British people when it comes to our NHS. And that is even before their plan for the next few years. Cuts even deeper than those we've seen in the last 5. Well, that's not the future I believe in. That's not the future you believe in. And it's not the future the British people believe in either. So we will turn around our NHS. With a Labour government, there'll be a new double lock to protect our National Health Service, guaranteeing proper funding and stopping its privatisation. It starts with funding. And let me say this. You can't protect the NHS. You can't claim to protect the NHS. And this is a message to all parties in this campaign if you don't show where the money is coming from. And we're showing where the money is coming from for our plan. We will have a mansion tax on properties worth over £2 million. We will have a levy on the tobacco companies. And we will close those tax loopholes exploited by the hedge funds, which these Tories will never deal with. And we'll use that money. And we'll use that money for 20,000 more nurses, 8,000 more doctors, 5,000 more care workers, and 3,000 more midwives, joining up services from home to hospital. And friends, we'll do something else too. We will repeal their terrible Health and Social Care Act. And let me tell you why. And this is really important for the future of our NHS. Because their act effectively forces the competitive tendering of all services. A third of all contracts have gone to private providers since it was passed. Now we know this doesn't fit the values of our NHS. But there's something else which really matters for the future. It doesn't serve the NHS of the future either. You see, privatisation of the NHS is no longer simply out of step with our principles, it's out of step with the needs of the time. Because if the task of healthcare is integrating services, bringing them together, the last thing we need is to fragment and privatise. Because it sets hospital against hospital, service against service. The truth is that privatisation cannot meet the needs of a 21st century health service. So we're going to restore the right principles to our National Health Service. With the next Labour government, we'll scrap David Cameron's market framework for the NHS and stop the tide of privatisation. The NHS will be the preferred provider. And no company working with the NHS will be able to profit by cherry-picking, rejecting patients with more complex and expensive needs for their own advantage. And for the first time, we will cap the profits that private health companies can make from our National Health Service. The standard rule will be a 5% cap, because the money we pay for our healthcare should be invested for patient care, not for excess profits for private firms. So here is where Labour stands on the NHS. It's time to put patients before profits and stop privatisation. It's time to invest in more doctors, nurses, midwives and care workers with a funded plan. It's time to rescue the National Health Service from David Cameron, and that is what we will do. Our fourth pledge is on immigration. We need controls on immigration. That's why people who come here will have to wait for at least 2 years until they can claim benefits. And we will call time on employers who don't pay the minimum wage, gang masters that exploit migrant labour, recruitment agencies that only advertise abroad. This Labour Party will never cut ourselves off from the rest of the world. But we are a party that believes in rules which protect working people, and that's what we'll do. Our fifth and final pledge is to our young people. You know, there is nothing worse about this government than the way they have made the young bear so much of the burden of hard times. For the first time in our memory, so many young people think they're going to have a worse life than their parents. So at every stage of life, the next Labour government will improve chances for the young. Smaller class sizes for 5-, 6- and 7-year-olds. An apprenticeship for every school leaver who gets the grades. Tuition fees reduced to £6,000, investing in our future, investing in the next generation, giving hope back to our young people and restoring the promise of Britain. So we offer a strong economic foundation, higher living standards, an NHS with time to care, controls on immigration, and the next generation doing better than the last. These are our pledges to the British people. And friends, you know, the last few weeks have shown more than ever why it's so important we have this better plan. Because we now know what's on offer from David Cameron. Low pay carries on because he thinks that's the route to economic success. Insecurity at work persists because he thinks that's the way that Britain prospers. Young people carry on being mired in debt because he tells us there's no alternative. And on top of that, he plans bigger, deeper, worse cuts to public services. That is the wrong future for working families. That is the wrong future for Britain. So that is the choice. A Tory government that looks out only for the few, or a Labour government that will stand up for working families in every part of our country. Now look, I know this election is going to be tough. You know this election's going to be tough. Like so many races here during the Olympics, it may come down to the wire. Neck and neck. And I know our opponents are going to throw everything they have in our way because they're desperate to hang on to power. But we know we can win this fight on behalf of the British people. We know we must stand up for working families. We know we must change Britain. Hard work rewarded. Young people given hope again. Exploitative 0 hours contracts banned. The health service rescued. Time called on tax avoidance. The richest paying their fair share. The bedroom tax abolished. That's the difference between a Labour government and a Tory government. Here is where we stand. Here is where we stand. Fairness, social justice, equality, a better plan, a better future. Let's go out and win it together. Let's go out and change our country. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Right, now friends, we are about to board the battle bus to go to a key seat. So I'm going to take literally a couple of questions, and I'm going to take Chris Shipp from ITN, and I'm going to take the BBC. Chris.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chris Shipp from ITV News. Ed, you spoke a lot about Britain just now. Your Scottish leader, Jim Murphy, says today that Scotland can pick the winner of this election. Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP leader, said this morning that you and her can lock the Tories out of Downing Street. Voters in England and Wales will be forgiven for thinking they're being frozen out of this election. So, to use one of your phrases, can Britain do better than this?
There's one way to get the Tories out, and that's to elect a Labour government. And I want to move... And I want a majority Labour government. And you know, the only coalition I'm interested in is a coalition of working families across our country, in every part of the United Kingdom, who want to change this country, and who know this country's got to change. And that's where I'm focused on, and that's where I'll be focused on in the next 6 weeks. I'll take Ian Watson.
Thanks, Ian Watson from BBC. If I can ask about policy and personality, if you don't mind. First of all, on policy, you announced this 5% cap on profits in the NHS. If that leads to fewer private sector companies getting involved, and presuming you're relaxed about that, but with a third of contracts going to the private sector, do you think there should also be a cap on private sector involvement in the first place? And secondly, on personality, you mentioned the Prime Minister had been rattled last night, but the Snap poll suggested that he'd won if not the debate, the contest, the discussion. Do you think your own performance could be improved? How do you rate your own performance last night?
Look, let me take the second part first, and then I'll deal with your first question. I'll leave the sort of scores on the doors to other people. That's not what I'm interested in. Look, we were facing a tough fight yesterday, and we're facing a tough fight today. And what I valued about the debate last night was the chance to talk directly to the British people about the future of this country and how we change this country. And that's what I'm going to do for the next 6 weeks of this campaign, and that's what all of my colleagues are going to do as well. On your first question about the health service, let me say a couple of things. Look, firstly, just on the scale of what's happening to the private sector, the very fact of repealing what is at the heart of David Cameron's approach, which is the Health and Social Care Act, which is a recipe for privatisation and fragmentation, is the way to stop the tide of privatisation. We do want to stop it for the reasons that I've set out. This isn't just simply a question of values. The values part of it's important. But look, the thing that Andy Burnham has led on is this idea of integration. Integration of healthcare, social care, mental health. But an integrated service cannot be a privatised and fragmented service. That is the opposite to an integrated service. And so there's a values reason, and if you like, there's a pragmatic reason, both of which come together. What works for the NHS in future is our model of a preferred provider model. On the first part of your question, look, we do think it's right to limit the profits, because we do think it's right to say that when private sector companies are involved, we don't get excess profits, which is draining money away from the National Health Service. And look, I think this is going to be a common sense thing that people will think is the right thing to do. I hope other parties adopt this, because it's the right thing to do for the future of our NHS. Now, look, I said I wasn't going to take more questions. I will take one more question. I'll take Andy Bell from Channel 5.
Thank you very much. Andy Bell, 5 News. Ed, aren't you in danger of really doing a bit of scaremongering here? When people hear the word privatisation, they start to worry that they're going to be made to pay for their health service. Isn't the fact that nobody under this government who didn't want to has had to pay a penny for their health care, and partly that's been due to private provision?
Well, no, I don't agree with that. Let me explain. Look, there's two parts to this. Look, there is a big question for the British people about whether you want to have a privatised and fragmented service. Make no mistake about this. This is what the government's plan is. They put it in their legislation. It's at the heart of their legislation. They boasted about it being in their legislation. That's what they think is the right way forward for the NHS. Now, I happen to believe, for the reasons of values that I've set out and what works for the future of healthcare, this will be a disaster, frankly. And you've seen 1/3 of the contracts awarded going to the private sector. You're going to see a lot more of it in the next 5 years if they were to get back and get their hands back on the health service. I don't think that's the answer. And it's not just me saying it. Think about the people who are experts on healthcare, from patients to doctors to other groups. They're all saying this is a recipe not for an efficient health service, but a fragmented health service that is not working. Now, go to your point about people having to pay to go private. What is the real lesson of the past on this, the lesson before 1997, and the lesson I fear for the future if David Cameron were to get back? It's that people end up having the option of either waiting for an unacceptably long time or having to go private. That becomes the offer on the table for people. So I think there is a real fear that that becomes the option for people. And you don't have a health service that is properly serving people. So there's a big choice at this election and a big choice of the health service on the ballot paper. Friends, to the Labour Party supporters who are here, thank you. Look, the fight starts here. The fight starts here. This is going to be a fight for right across our country. And it is a fight where we've got to strain every sinew and give every fibre of our being. Because we have a message that we need to get out to people about how we want to change this country. That work began yesterday and today, but that work goes on right up to the finishing line, right up to May the 7th. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Cheers.